The rain fell in steady sheets across downtown Chicago, turning the empty streets into rivers of reflected neon light. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday, and most people had the good sense to be inside, warm and dry. But Emma Rodriguez didn't have that luxury. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she made her way down the alley behind the Grandview Hotel. Her worn sneakers splashed through puddles as she pushed her shopping cart, the wheels squeaking in protest against the wet pavement. Inside the cart, carefully sorted and covered with a plastic tarp, were the bottles and cans she had collected throughout the day. Emma had been living this way for 3 months now, ever since she aged out of the foster care system with nowhere to go. At 19, she was old enough to be on her own, but young enough to still feel lost in a world that seemed to have no place for her. The small amount she earned from recycling barely covered food, let alone rent for even the cheapest room. As she rounded the corner near the hotel's service entrance, something caught her eye. There, slumped against the brick wall next to an overflowing dumpster, was a man in what looked like an expensive suit. His dark hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and he appeared to be unconscious. Emma's first instinct was to keep walking. She had learned the hard way that getting involved with strangers, especially drunk ones, usually led to trouble. But as she drew closer, she could see that rain was soaking through his clothes, and his skin looked pale in the dim light from the street lamp. She stopped her cart and approached carefully. "Hey," she called softly. "You okay?" The man stirred slightly but didn't open his eyes. Emma could smell alcohol on him, but there was something else too. He looked genuinely ill, not just intoxicated. His breathing was shallow, and when she knelt down beside him, she could feel heat radiating from his skin even through the cold rain. "Mister," she touched his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" This time his eyes fluttered open. They were gray-green, like the color of the lake during a storm, and they struggled to focus on her face. He started to say, then stopped, confusion clouding his features. "I don't. Where am I?" Emma looked around the empty alley, then back at the man who was clearly in no condition to take care of himself. Every practical instinct she had told her to walk away. She had enough problems of her own. But looking at him lying there, soaked and shivering, she couldn't bring herself to leave. "You're behind the Grandview Hotel," she said. "Do you remember how you got here?" He tried to sit up straighter but swayed dangerously. "The meeting, it went wrong. Everything went wrong." His words were slurred, but Emma could hear genuine pain beneath the alcohol. "Lost everything. Company, house, everything." Emma had heard enough sob stories from people on the streets to recognize real despair when she saw it. This wasn't just someone who had too much to drink. This was someone whose world had fallen apart. "Look, you can't stay here," she said, making a decision that surprised even her. "It's going to get colder, and you're already sick. I know a place where you can get warm and dry off." The abandoned building where Emma had been staying wasn't much, just an old warehouse with a broken lock and enough intact roof to keep most of the rain out. But it was better than an alley, and she had managed to make one corner relatively comfortable with blankets and cardboard she had found. Getting the man there proved to be a challenge. He could barely walk, leaning heavily on her slight frame. As they made their way slowly through the empty streets, Emma had to stop every few blocks to let him rest, worried that he might collapse entirely. "What's your name?" she asked during one of these breaks. "Michael," he said, then after a pause, "Michael Harrison." Emma didn't recognize the name, but something about the way he said it made her think it should mean something to her. When they finally reached the warehouse, Emma helped Michael settle onto the pile of blankets in her makeshift shelter. She found a relatively clean towel and handed it to him. "You should try to dry off," she said, "and drink some water if you can." She pulled a half-empty bottle from her backpack and offered it to him. Michael looked around the dim space, taking in the cardboard walls, the careful way Emma had arranged her few possessions, the dignity she had managed to create in this forgotten place. "You live here?" he asked, and Emma heard no judgment in his voice, only quiet understanding. "For now," she said simply. "It's not much, but it's dry." Over the next few hours, as Michael sobered up and his fever broke, Emma learned his story. He had been the CEO of Harrison Industries, a company his father had built, and he had expanded into a multi-million-dollar empire. But a series of bad investments, combined with what he now realized was betrayal by people he trusted, had cost him everything in a single day. I had no idea where to go, he admitted as dawn light began to filter through the warehouse windows. I've spent my whole life in boardrooms and country clubs. I never learned how to lose everything. Emma listened without offering empty reassurances. She understood the particular kind of despair that came from having nowhere to belong. I used to think I knew what it meant to have nothing, Michael continued. But I always had something: my name, my reputation, my father's legacy. Now I don't even have that. You have your life, Emma said quietly. That's something. When Michael was feeling well enough to leave, Emma expected him to walk out of her life as suddenly as he had entered it. Instead, he stood in the doorway of the warehouse for a long moment. Thank you, he said. Not just for the shelter, for treating me like a person when I wasn't sure I deserved it. Emma shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Michael said firmly. They wouldn't have. 3 days later, Emma was sorting through her collection of recyclables when a black car pulled up beside her. She tensed, ready to run if necessary. But then Michael stepped out of the passenger seat. He looked different, clean, wearing a simple but well-fitted suit, his hair neatly combed. But his eyes held the same vulnerability she had seen that night in the alley. I've been looking for you, he said. Emma remained wary. What for? I wanted you to know that I'm getting back on my feet. It turns out I wasn't as alone as I thought. Some of my father's old friends came forward when they heard what happened. They're helping me start over. He paused, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. But more than that, I wanted to give you this. Emma looked at the envelope suspiciously. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Michael said. It's a job offer. I'm starting a new company. Something smaller and more focused than what I had before. I need someone I can trust. Someone who understands what it means to rebuild from nothing. He held out the envelope. Someone who would help a stranger in an alley because it was the right thing to do. Emma stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. I don't know anything about business, she said. Neither did I, really, Michael replied with a slight smile. I knew about money and power and deals. But she taught me something more important. She taught me about kindness without expectation, about dignity in the face of loss. That's worth more than any MBA. Emma took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a formal job offer, starting salary enough to change her life completely. Why? She asked. Michael looked back toward the alley where their paths had first crossed, then met her eyes again. Because sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what really matters. And what really matters isn't what you have. It's what you're willing to give when you have nothing left to lose.